Oh, there we go. Perfect. Right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a brand new week of music here at the RGM Experience podcast with me, Carl Maloney, supporting my Sheffield United shirt today because today we're at Wembley playing the mighty Manchester City, and I think we're going to hammer them. By the time this podcast comes out, we will probably have got battered 8-0, but who cares? Let's crack on with some music, and we've got an amazing guest today, Chaz Jankel. Hi, mate.
Hello, Carl.
Thanks for joining us today, mate. What I love the most is, and when I speak to, because we speak to a lot of bands at the magazine, the holy grail for anybody starting out in music is to have a career in music. And, you know, you've had 40 years of it, mate.
Oh, yeah.
How do you look back on that?
Well, I take one day at a time.
Yeah.
Really. One day at a time. I mean, I didn't. Well, I was professional, I suppose, from my late teens, but I started playing when I was 7, way before I even thought of it as a profession.
Yeah.
You know, it was, I saw Lonnie Donegan holding a guitar. Well, in fact, I didn't know it was guitar. It was a bit of wood that was like horizontal to his body. And I thought, that looks like, he's smiling. That looks like fun. And I asked my parents, can I have one of those things, you know? And they duly obliged and got me a guitar, a little Spanish guitar.
Yeah.
And it was, you know, that's what led us to this interview today.
It's mad, isn't it? You know, just like, you know, the journey of music and the creative industry and the troubles and the tribulations that goes along with creative industries, particularly from a political view and that kind of stuff, where it always seems to be the first thing to get knocked down by the governments and stuff and defunded and all that kind of stuff. But we're still there, aren't we? We're still having it. We won't take any bullshit from them.
No. I mean, it's absolutely. I mean, the arts, I would say, is the last area to be cordoned off, really. You know, we're very fortunate. I still feel that you can be fairly articulate with your reasoning and your feelings through music, probably through art, probably through literature. So I'm very grateful for that. Yeah.
So if anybody's not heard of Chaz Jankel, how would you introduce yourself to them, mate?
Oh my God. I'm a bit of I would say I'm a singer-songwriter, musician, composer. Got a very broad taste in music, actually. You know, I was born in 1952. I'm still here, touch wood, and touch wood. And I love doing what I do. I've been very fortunate. I wouldn't recommend my path to anybody else because I've had a very varied path. Yeah. In fact, I nickname myself Butterfly Man, really, because I flit from one area to another. But in the bigger scheme of things, I mean, if we accept that infinity is the bigger picture, why not? Why not investigate everything that comes into your imagination, which is what I do. But I do appreciate you can't put every single genre on one album unless you're playing with Ian Dury. I mean, he never recognized genres, but I'm trying to hone it down with my own work so I just don't go completely nuts and give some semblance of unity to a collection of music.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm trying to do these days. But as I say, having a very broad taste in music means I can explore endlessly.
Does that make it harder to finish a project then, being that open to everything?
Yeah, it does. I mean, one thing I've noticed of late, Carl, is stripping back is very important on an arrangement of music, so that that you don't, because you might just start with an initial idea on guitar, say, right, and then the next thing is, all right, you write a lyric maybe, or you don't even have a lyric. Say and I go into my little garden retreat studio, which is about 25 feet from here. It's at the end of my garden, and I'll start recording it. And then the thing is, the more you listen to it, the more you get bored with it. So you add layers and layers and layers. However, if you were with a bunch of musicians in a room, you just a small, say, drummer, bass player, and a keyboard player or guitar player, you wouldn't have that issue, because that dynamic is and that feeding off each other creates a whole other energy. If you're on your own, you tend to think, nah, there's another layer. And one thing I've often heard said is a cliche now, but simplicity is everything. And when you think about great songs, I mean, you don't care whether there's a viola playing or what I'm trying to say is the great songs. It's about the melody, it's about about the music, and the orchestration and the coloring is important. It's all important, but you don't want to overcrowd your arrangement. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that's very important. If I've learned anything, that's it. Don't put too much in. Leave something to the imagination.
If I'm getting from that a little bit like post-production and that kind of stuff, and all the toys that are around at the minute, is that kind of part of what you mean as well?
Yeah, I do. I mean that you don't. Okay.
All
right. I was just going to. Sorry, Carl. You say what you wanted to say.
No. I was just going to say, I see a lot of bands these days. When I used to be in a band, you used to have a wah-wah pedal, a bit of fuzz, and something else. But now you see these bands with like house sizes pedals on and that kind of stuff. I'm just wondering if that could be viewed as overkill as well, couldn't it? If you know what I mean, and make it harder work. And
you're absolutely right. I think once again, you look at the greats, I mean, Charlie Parker or Miles Davis or, even Jeff Beck. I mean, Jeff Beck, he could play anything. He wouldn't need all his pedals. However, yeah, he was very sophisticated. But I think you can overgild the lily. Is that the right expression? You can do too much. But I don't want to get stuck into that, into that mindset, because I use toys as well.
Yeah.
But on stage with the Blockheads, I just go straight into my amp. I've got one foot pedal that changes channels, and that's a lot. Because, I remember there was a time when I had 3 different kinds of phasers. I mean, how many men need? How many phasers do you need in a stomp board? And it was ridiculous. And then I'd be down on the floor because I'd be nervous about falling over if I hit it with my foot. So then I'd be on the floor, And where's Chaz gone? Oh, bloody hell, he's down there. So. No, I like it raw. When I think about the influences I had as a guitar player when in my teens, it was Albert King. It was it was The Who. It was Small Faces, Eric Clapton. People just had a great guitar, great one amp, very few effects, really.
Yeah. Fine, like there is a bit of overkill, particularly on the Unsigned scene, when you see these young kids climbing up the little stairs of a little shitty venue somewhere, just like climbing up with all these amps, and they bring the biggest amp. They're just like toys, don't they? Just kids and toys. It's fun. It's just funny sometimes when you.
And the other thing which is really interesting about all of this is we are subject to what the technology offers us at any one time. So I bet when before somebody had a wah-wah pedal. It didn't exist, and then suddenly, you're in a guitar shop trying out a guitar, and then suddenly from the other side of the room, there's this incredible wah 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 sound going. You think, what the hell is that?
Yeah, I want one.
I want one, Mum. It's only 120. Well, mind you, they've always been expensive, those things, but I do like them. It's lovely just to have them. These things.
Well, I'd like to just go back a little bit, because having a career in music over 40 years, we're going to come to, obviously you've got your new album and a new single coming out that we are going to cover as well, obviously, but looking back, what were you like as a young kid before music? What was life like around you, politically, and what you could see around you as a kid?
Well, I was fairly fortunate. I mean, I had pretty much a middle class background. I was, and as I just said earlier, I mean, I started playing when I was 7. So, and that was guitar. At about a few weeks or months after I picked up a guitar, I started playing piano. So, I mean, they were always there. They were always in the background of my life. Well, always very much a part of my daily procedure. And I went to school pretty normal. I loved sports. You know, I was pretty fast running until I started smoking when I was 14. Then I slowed down somewhat. I don't smoke now, but I did back then. And so I went to art school when I left school. I mean, I had a dual interest in art and music, and I went to St. Martin's. I got offered to do a place there to do a graphics course. I'd done a foundation course there, but I didn't have the foresight or the imagination to realize what I could do with my artistic talents other than, illustrate books, or I wasn't quite sure how to channel it. And then we were offered, my band Byzantium, who I was playing with at the time, were offered 3 gigs supporting the Faces. And I thought, this is it, big time, But the problem was, after that was it, 3 gigs and we're done. And I think I went and worked in a greengrocer after that. And I can still see the purple on my hands from boiling the beetroots in the morning. Takes a long time to get rid of that purple.
I can imagine,
And then, it was, once again, I kept on playing, and my parents were very supportive. But I was lingering at home in my early 20s because in my teens, I'd been sent to a boarding school.
Okay.
And I wasn't particularly happy there, but the thing was, I had my music, and music was like a kind of a means of escape. I could go wherever I wanted in my head. It wasn't, because we were only allowed out at certain times, and it was a bit like a sort of open prison, really. But you could only go out at certain times. So I was always in the music school, playing piano or guitar. And I used that as a means of escape. And I think I was well into my late 20s when I suddenly realized, I'm still using music as an escape rather than as a means of communication. And even today, I could be in my room writing a piece of music, or yesterday, I should say, because I haven't gone into the room today. But I still use it as a means of transport. You can go anywhere you want, and you don't need a passport. It's a very, it's a wonderful form of traveling, so to speak.
Are you quite introvert yourself personally then? And you're like
introvert? Yeah, I think you're right. Actually, I think you're right, and I have to balance it up. It's very important that, well spotted. That's the good word. I think it's funny because when I get out on stage and I'm playing with the Blockheads, it does feel, for example. It feels quite surreal, actually. I think, is this me? Am I in this body doing this? And I've got hundreds of people out in the audience, and I'm up here. And it's a. Have you ever? You're a musician. You perform live.
Yeah, we supported. The Arctic Monkeys supported my band, the first ever gig they played.
There you go.
To about 20 people, and the maximum amount of people we've played to is probably, I think we played with Spiral Carpets to a few hundred at Leadmill once in Sheffield. So I've had little experiences of it, which
did it feel
magical in my mind.
Okay, well, if everybody was musicians, nothing would happen to about 2:00 in the afternoon.
Yes.
Right. So I'm glad in a way that the world isn't just full of musicians, because I don't think you get a lot done. You get some great music, maybe, but I don't think you get bridges built. I don't think you'd have particularly, really good dentists.
Yes.
Et cetera, et cetera. However, sorry, what were you saying?
No, you talking about, like, we just made an observation that you might feel a bit, you use music as an escape. So as a person might be introverted. Well,
yeah, that's true. And then, so cutting a long story short, in my mid-20s, my parents helped me buy a Wurlitzer electric piano from Maurice Plaquet in Shepherd's Bush. And just as I was leaving the shop with my Wurlitz electric piano, I said to the manager, I said, listen, if anybody needs a keyboard player, give him my telephone number. And I wrote it on a little bit of paper, a little scrap of paper, gave it to him. He went, cheers, mate. And then the next day, the guitar player from the Kilburns walked in and said, oh, just chatting to the manager, he said, our keyboard players just left the band.
Oh, there you go.
There you go. And that was how things started for me, really, professionally, on a bigger scale. So the next day I was invited to a gig of Ian and the Kilburns, which was the last format of Kilburn and the High Roads. Oh. And I watched the band. I didn't even know if I liked it, really. I mean, it was like, I went to a pub, the Greyhound in, just in Fulham, the pub Greyhound, and Ian and the band were playing it was like watching, if there was a band in a Fellini movie, they would have been it. I mean, Ian had a Tommy Cooper fez on.
Nice.
It was good look. The sax player looked like, what's his name?
It's not easy to pull off a fez, is it?
No. Frank's, the sax player looked like Frank Zappa, right? And they were all playing this weird kind of very, angry kind of animated music. And I was stunned. And at the end of the set, I just walked up onto the stage, like, take me to your leader kind of thing. And I was halfway down the tunnel, the corridor that led the stage to the dressing room. And their roadie said from the stage, "Here, mate, where are you going?" He said, "If you want to see the band, you go around the front way." Yeah. Yes, all right, skipper. So I hopped off the stage, went round the front way, and I'm approaching the dressing room, and it looked like a Turkish bath. I can remember it to this day. It's all steam coming from the room. And one person had his eye on the door sitting there, and he saw me approach. He said, "Here, mate, do I know you? Well, fuck off then." and that's how Ian Dury greeted me. Oh. So nice. So I'm standing there thinking, well, that's a hell of a sort of, welcome,
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, it's life of backstage and rock and roll,
isn't it? And as I spun round and was going round out the door, and the guitar player said, "Oh, are you Chaz?" And I went, "Yeah." He went, "Oh, nice to meet you." And they didn't realise who I was. They thought I was just a punter. Anyway, I got the audition the next day. They had a rehearsal. I got the gig. And then months went by. We did loads of pubs. Ian was the king of the pub circuit, did loads of pubs. And then one day I'm thinking, I like this music, but it doesn't really grab me deep down, because my love really in my teens had mutated from the Beatles to Afro-American music. Really, that was when I heard Lee Dorsey, Get Out My Life Woman, which was the B-side of Working Down a Coal Mine. That was it. Man, I thought, what is that? The backbeat. Yes. And, and I thought, yeah, I love this rhythm. So I really started having a love affair with soul, with funk. Not to say I turned my back on English music, but that then became very deeply embedded with me. And I thought when I was with Ian, they weren't playing anything that was soulful. It was quite uptight, sort of more rockabilly based, I would say.
Was it difficult to get your influences in with Ian and the rest of the band then?
Well, not after they because when I started, as I just pointed out, I just had a Wurlitz piano. They didn't know I played guitar.
Oh, okay.
They didn't know I played guitar.
Yeah.
But I've always played both all the time, right? So I said to Ian, "Do you fancy writing some songs?" And he went, "Yeah, I'd love to." So he stopped doing so many gigs. I think he was tired of it.
Yeah.
And one of the first songs was "Sex and Drugs and Rock and Roll."
Yes.
And that became a big indie hit, massive #1, in Melody Maker and NME and all that. And one thing led to another, and then we recorded.
Did you know when you were writing that particular song? Because I were going to ask you about it, because you can't.
Yeah, there's a lot to cram in here.
When you were writing that song, did you know it was going to be a hit?
No.
Yeah.
No, not really. I mean, Ian was so well. There was something about Ian. You know, he was massive. His stature was phenomenal.
Yeah.
So maybe I thought I'm in good hands here. I mean, he was quite anarchic, and he was unpredictable, but at the same time, his drive was so, you couldn't argue with him at times. It was just so, his impetus. So maybe that's what also helped in the song being a huge hit. I mean, Sex and I don't know if you've heard this before, but I didn't know how to write the music to Sex and Drugs and Rock and Roll. I thought, how do you get a melody out of sex and drugs and rock and roll? So when I used to turn up at his flat, there'll be a trestle table and a bunch of lyrics and an Olivetti typewriter behind it where he'd been typing. And so I used to see this Sex and Drugs and Rock and Roll placed on top of the pile of lyrics. And I used to, when he wasn't watching, I used to slip it under the other lyrics and tackle something else.
It seems like, you know, because even when you say sex and drugs and rock and roll, it's naturally in you, you know. But you know, just the history, you know, it's absorbed in, you know, in you know, just as in me as a human, you know, it feels like it's easy, but you know, when it's not a thing there, yeah, and you're creating it,
it's more like a chant than a kind of somewhere over the rainbow, isn't it? You know,
yeah.
So anyway. Yeah. Anyway, one day he says to me, "How about this, Chaz?" He goes, "Bam, bam, 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 bam." And I went, "Blimey, that's good," because he didn't usually throw these great ideas at me. I went, "Oh, okay, yeah." So then I pieced together the dun 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 dun, dun to his lyric, and we put the song out, and it was a big massive underground hit where he went, you know, #1, as I said. And a few months after that, I'm round his place and we're writing more songs. And he says, "Do you want a cup of coffee?" And I went, "Oh, yeah, I'd love one." You know, so he pops out of the living room, goes to the kitchen, and he put a record on in the meantime. And it was a record by Ornette Coleman called Change of the Century, made in the 60s, right? So this was like 18 years or something. I haven't worked out the precise amount, maybe more than that, before we'd written Sex and Drugs and Rock and Roll, right? And he puts it on, and so Ornette Coleman, Change of the Century, and I'm trying to figure out a new piece of music for his new lyric, and suddenly in the background, I'm not really aware of it to start with, I hear ba-dum dum 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 ba-dum dum dum dum. I said, I'm thinking, where's that? Well, that sounds familiar. Oh my God! It was a bass solo by Charlie Hayden on this record, and it was the riff to Sex and Drugs and Rock and Roll. I went, you. And as I looked up, Ian was standing at the door with 2 cups of coffee, smiling from ear to ear. And I went, "Oh, Jesus, you know, oh, bloody hell." And then he had a sort of a guilty moment. And somehow he tracked down Charlie Hayden, who was on tour in Japan. And I remember Ian got this postcard back saying, "Don't worry, Ian, it's all right. This is not our music. Do what you want with it." So he actually, and that was the story of Sex and Drugs and Rock and Roll.
So nobody came back years after, you know, like because you heard the riff from somewhere else. Nobody came back and tried to claim that.
No. And I'll tell you what, Carl. My theory is, I might be wrong, but there's an accordionist from New Orleans called Clifton Cheniere. And he did a piece. I once listened to some of his music, and there was a kind of piece that went da 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 da, you know. And I thought, is that the roots of, you know, where this riff has come from? And I think, you know, it could well be French, you know, like a French folk tune. I could just see them, you know, winding down with it, you know, having had a few glasses of vino, you know, having been to their local tavern, wandering down the street, singing something like with a hurdy-gurdy going or something. I don't know. But that's as far as I got with my investigations.
Yeah, I can imagine. What was yours and Ian's and the band's relationship like with that song over the years? Because when I've spoke to musicians that have been in music for many years, they have different relationships with the song. You know, they want to new stuff, but they're aware that the fans want to hear the hits and the bit, you know, that kind of stuff. What's your relationship being like with that particular song?
With that particular song, yeah, well, I'm going to accept that it is a song that the audience really like. I know Norman at one point Norman Watroy, he got tired of it, and he said, "Oh, you know, go on." And then he says to me sometimes, he says, "Chaz, you didn't like Sex and Drugs and Rock and Roll." It was him, you know. I mean, I've you know, I enjoyed it. We did a version of it on Sight and Sound where I funked it up a bit, and I actually added a few more sort of but I started getting into a bit of a groove on it. In fact, we even changed the bass line, and that particular version I love. It's on, you know, BBC Sight and Sound. It's a video up on YouTube. Otherwise, because I don't like it when it gets too pedantic, do all that. It has to. All music for me has to have a bounce, you know. Otherwise, it's like, you know, using a sledgehammer to break a nut, you know. No, so I'm very grateful for the song because whenever we play it, it's very popular. And I've noticed in Europe, that's still our sort of like calling card, you know, outside of England. You know, you go anywhere, or Italy, they love that anarchy or you know, that kind of what they associate England was all about in the late 70s, you know, and we were the people that brought that to life. What it was Ian just being very clever and smart and sort of plucking this slogan out of the air. He, you know, who knows? He might have seen it in the Daily Mirror. I don't know where he saw it, but it became a chant. Yeah.
And you know, obviously, it's not all about one song. "Hit Me With the Rhythm Stick," which is more popular to me, just me personally. That's just another massive anthem throughout, you know, millions of people's lives. It's quite a responsibility, that, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, you know, we were so fortunate. You know, late 70s, like 77, 78, we were at the top of the peak of our popularity, let's put it like that. And a lot of that was due to the fact that we'd been doing a lot of gigs throughout England. We're doing a lot of universities. And so we had a lot of support at that point. And so what happened was Ian had rented a house in Kent. And in the living room, he had a little drum machine. And then he had his drum kit next to it. And he put a Fender Rhodes electric piano was also there. And he was just sitting on the drums. And I'll come back to his drive, what his why he played like he did. He had a very kind of basic, earthy kind of feel for his drums. So often it would just be 4 to the floor because of his polio, he couldn't do tricky things with that leg that hit the bass drum pedal. So it was very sort of you know, and he liked that. It liked that sort of drive, and I'll explain why in a moment. But first of all, so he's sitting there playing this drum beat, and I just started riffing on the Fender Rhodes. Digga 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 digga. There's only so long you can do that before you get bored, right? And so we probably had a cup of tea, and later that night, I said good night and went back to my house. I was living near Pinner in North London at that point. Anyway, the next morning, I was listening back to a song that was on New Boots and Panties, which was Ian and my first album. And there's a song called Wake Up and Make Love. And on the end of it, on the song, after Ian sung his last lyric, I go, there's a piano break, goes, and I thought, why do I like that? Why does that work for me? And I suddenly heard this tiny little, there's a little kind of pickup just before I play the riff. Sorry, it sounds a bit nerdy, all this, doesn't it? But anyway,
Good, yeah.
bum, 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 bum. And I thought, oh, if I take that little that little kind of, that little, and I put that on the front of the riff that I was playing the day before with Ian, I'll get bap, ding, 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 bap, ding, ding. And I thought, oh, excuse me. I thought that's amazing, right? Okay, so I called up Ian, and I said, like, you've got to hear this. This is great, right? And he said, well, come down. I went down, and I think it was only a couple of days had gone by since I'd been down at his place. By this time, he'd put the piano in the garage. There was another piano, like an acoustic piano, in his garage. It's a bit cold, I remember. And he'd written out the lyric, very succinct, 3 verses and a chorus, which was unusual for him. Usually there was kind of pages and pages of lyrics. It was very prolific. But in this particular case, it was really succinct. And he said, I'm going back to the house. It's a bit cold in here. So I knocked together the verses with my riff, which was peppered all over the place on this piece, and went back in the house. It was done, and then Ian invited the Blockheads down, and a couple of days later, they rehearsed it. Next day or 2 days later, we went into the Workhouse studio, which was Manfred Mann's studio, where we had recorded New Boots and Panties, the album, and recorded it. And I think we did about 9 takes of it, but it was take 2 that was chosen. And
just all recorded live, all at the same time.
It was all recorded, well, except the vocal. The vocal was overlaid. And my guitar, I played guitar on it. I overdubbed guitar, the break on the end. Anyway, not the rhythm guitar throughout it, but just the lead guitar solo on the end. And then I was so excited by it that there was a phone in the studio, and I called up my mum and I said, Mum, we've just recorded our first number one. It wasn't a number one, but I was proven to be correct. Yeah. I said, this is, it was just screaming. It just had everything that maybe Ian and I had been working towards. Not to say it was our greatest song, but it had that, wow, it had something. It was within the grooves. It had magic.
Yeah. So once all these songs are out there, excuse me, in the world, everybody's just enjoying them and enjoying the albums, the music, the live performances. How was it in the band with Ian, just in general?
Well, Ian was a mixed blessing.
Yeah.
Genius. He was 10 years older than me. I'm 71 now, so he would be 81 today if he was still on this planet. Yeah. He was very different. One-on-one, very, very sweet. I do, and you've asked me, so I'm going to be honest. If he'd had a drink, he could get quite nasty. He could do, not always, but if he had a grudge or a gripe about somebody, he could be quite, could be a little bit hostile. And I likened him actually to a gang boss. He was a bit like we were his gang. We were his, he liked a crew, and he was the boss. He had phenomenal energy and just loved life. Ian was essentially, before he became a musician, was very good at art. And I don't know if you know about his artwork, but he's had, he was very, very good. Peter Blake actually taught him, and Ian used to teach art as well. And Ian once said to me one day, he said, when I realized I couldn't paint as well as Rembrandt, I'll never be as good as Rembrandt. I'm going to go into, I'll try music. And not only that, you can get more girls that way. Right. I mean, he was, Ian was a laugh as well. He did like to have a laugh. He did see the funny side of life. He was extremely stoic. He never complained about his disability. And life back then in the 70s was very difficult. There wasn't the facilities for disability. Getting in, onto a stage could be a nightmare. If there weren't the steps or. So
what was it
you
like?
know,
What was it like for you to be part of that crew then? Did you feel part of the crew? Did you feel valued, really? You know, was it all about Ian sometimes? Was that a problem?
I know because the band's still working today,
Yeah.
and it's a lot smoother today. I mean, to be honest, there isn't you know, it, yeah, because you can imagine when, you know, when there's a lot of drugs and a lot of drink involved, right? It's unpredictable.
Mm.
And you probably know people yourself that when they've had a drink, it's like carte blanche, you know, like to say what they really feel about somebody. But then you have to remember that all that's been fueled by alcohol.
Yeah.
And I think it wasn't as mature as it could have been at times.
Yeah.
But maybe maturity isn't always at the heart of great music. Anyway, I don't know, but it was a very creative period. We were all a lot younger, had a lot more physical energy.
Mm.
It was, yeah, I mean, it was crazy at times. It was crazy. I mean, yeah, I mean, I remember one time, I don't know why, I just a thought came up, you know, we were playing in Spain, and we played in a huge gig in Madrid, and our next gig next night was in Barcelona, and it was just at the end of this gig in Barcelona, in Madrid, we were playing an encore. It was a song called Francis, and I started it, and I didn't realize that the sax player had a little thing to play on the front. I'd forgotten about that, and I'm just playing the beginning of the song, and suddenly there's a hand on my head. I'm on stage in front of 3,000 people, and I turn around. It's Davey, our sax player, and he says, "If you ever do that again, I'll kill you." And I said, "Do what?" And he said, "Bring the song in before I'm ready." And he goes, bam, and he headbutts me. Yeah, and I went, whoa, reading back, and he came for me, and I put my hand up, and I managed to get one in. And I got, so he'd headbutted me, and then I got him in the eye, right? And this is all going on, and the drummer, he's like, keeps on playing, right? The guy, our roadie, who's standing aside, he was looking at girls in the front, you know, like looking at some girl in the front of the audience, right? He wasn't looking, right? So all this is going on. Finally, somebody sees there's a big fight going on the keyboard rostrum, right? And he's alerted to it, and he gets hold of Davey, and he chucks him off the stage, and, you know, sends him into the dressing room. Ian comes over, you know, takes full advantage of the melodrama and sings the rest of the song with head bowed on the Hammond. You know, is this what life has come to? And that was just, you know, when you're in, and okay, so what happens next? I go into the dressing room, and I think it's the law of the jungle at that point. You know, our roadie who you know, who had an illustrious past. He said, "Go on, Chaz. The thing now is you go in, just you and him." He held the rest of the band back, and I went in there into the dressing room where Davey was, and Davey was apologetic, but, you know, he lost his rag. You know, too much sun. Which he, you know, he was you know, he'd lost his rag. I mean, we'd all been in this little bubble, and you know, and that was just one example of how things could go nutty.
Yeah.
Well,
thanks for sharing that with me. I always enjoy those type of rock and roll historic stories. It's just,
I don't mean, listen, everything's all right with me and Davey now, but you know, at the time, you can imagine you don't feel. It's destabilizing. Let's put it like that.
Well, you can laugh about it now, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
So moving forward a little bit, so, you know, Ian left us sadly in 2000. What kind of adjustments did you make to continue carrying on with the Blockheads after Ian sadly left us?
Yeah, well, you know, Phil Jupiter stood in for Ian for a little bit. He was a huge fan of Ian's lyrics. And he said, "Listen, I'll help you out, lads, for a little bit." And he stood in. We did a few gigs with him. But then there was another guy called Derek the Drawer, Derek Hussey, who'd been Ian's unpaid minder and driver for quite a few years, since the early 90s.
Yeah.
and he said he'd sing. Or we asked him to, and he knew all the lyrics. So from the year 2000 onwards, he sang with the band, but also he wrote brilliant lyrics himself, really good lyrics. And I think we made either 3 or 4 albums with him writing. Really strong stuff. Well, Derek passed about a year ago, Derek Hussey. And then we were scuppered again, you know, like, well, now what are we going to do? And a friend of mine who actually does a lot of graphic design, he's a graphic artist who does work for myself, for my own work, for my own albums and stuff I put up online, said he'd been working with this chap called Mike Bennett. And I don't know if you know who Mike Bennett is, but he lives in Manchester. He's lived there for many years. And
the names ring a bell. It's not coming to me though, but I'm rubbish with names in general.
Oh, he's so prolific, you know, like he's an actor, various things he's done. He's a producer. He's done a lot of stuff. But anyway, he joined the band about 9 months ago. We've done about 12 or so gigs with him, and he's really doing a great job, Mike Bennett. So that's where we are at the moment. Yeah.
So any fisticuffs in the current?
Oh my God! No, that's what I mean. Right now, it's like I can't believe how democratic it feels. It feels like it is such a sweet energy. Carl, I can't tell you, it's fantastic. Yeah, really lovely.
So, how do you find the time to do your own solo stuff as well? Then,
well, I'm very fortunate that you know I can do this full time. What I do, and obviously, we've never actually been. The Blockheads have never been a heavy working band. You know, it's not like we do gigs every day. We do maybe 30 gigs a year. So that's a lot of days where I'm not working with the Blockheads. And also, as I was saying earlier, my music taste is pretty broad. And a lot of music I wrote, I write is not suitable for the Blockheads. And a lot of that music will go elsewhere. You know, I mean, I do write quite a lot, but, only very few pieces actually make it out of my head or in my music room into the world. The bigger world. And
how do you decide where something goes? So if you write a piece of music, you physically love it, you feel, how do you make a decision whether it's going to be something to do with the Blockheads, something to do with your solo stuff, or for other people? How does that process work?
It's very difficult.
Yeah,
it's really difficult. So that's a very good, interesting question, because I'd like to think they tell me where they want to go. The more muscular Anglo-Saxon sanguine. I'm using plucking out words out the
I know. I don't know what it knows me, but I'll just go with it.
Anyway, nor do I. They sound good. They sound good. Okay. Anyway, there is something that a Blockhead song has to have, right? Okay. Those ones I'll say I'll take them to the Blockheads. I haven't written anything with Mike Bennett yet, but with Derek, he used to come round to my yard, or come round to my studio and wherever I was working, and we used to sit and write songs together. What I have noticed though, at the moment, we're doing very few live with the songs I wrote with Derek. We're doing one of the songs we wrote with Derek, and that's because Mike Bennett was such a huge fan of Ian that that we're concentrating on that catalogue. And we have a huge catalogue, and you mentioned this something earlier, that it's very difficult for artists, even Paul McCartney, someone like that. He writes a new song, he might think this is the best song he's ever written, but getting it into his live set is very difficult, because the audience want to hear pieces they know. And so it doesn't stop the an artist wanting to write, we do it because we love writing. But that's where we are at the moment.
Yeah.
I think we've got an hour and we do an hour and a half set. But they're mainly songs that that I wrote with Ian, or other people wrote. I Want to Be Straight. I didn't write that. I didn't write What a Waste. So it's not always me that was co-writing these songs. But
what goes on in your head? So we'll concentrate on your solo stuff now, because you've got a new single out, you've got your album coming out. So much going on. It's ridiculous.
You do want a life outside of this interview with me rambling on. I know the feeling.
No.
Yeah, go on.
No, like you mentioned, you write for the Blockheads, you write for other people, you write for yourself.
Yeah. Talk
me through the feeling that you get when you realize you've written one for yourself and it's going to be yours and your thing, not anybody else's, just yours. What happens then?
Well, I was very fortunate. Coming back to Rhythm Stick, hit me with the Rhythm Stick. On the back of that, I got a record deal with A&M. What I mean by that was, during that period, I managed to accrue some money. I put in the bank, and I wrote a song called "I Know Corrida," which I co-wrote it, which Quincy Jones went on to cover it. But I wrote that, and then on the strength of that and one of the songs, I got a record deal with A&M. And so with that advance from A&M and my royalties, I had just enough to build a studio. And I did with a chap called Philip Bagnall, who did the hard labor and the designing, but I provided the cash and the musical inspiration. That was in 1979, 80. And we built a studio called we called it East Coast Studios. It was in Notting Hill Gate in London. And that's where I made 4 albums on A&M. And it was a phenomenally creative time. It was a brilliant old building that was, it still exists to this day. It's very popular with loads of artists, from Mumford & Sons to Adele to jazz artists. I sold my share, sold the studio, I should say, in 1990. So since then, I haven't been working there, but I recorded some great stuff there. A lot of the songs on my albums were co-written with Ian Dury, and one of my big songs there was a song called "Glad to Know You," which isn't particularly well known here in this country, but it was a massive club hit in America. And to this day, I sort of have a twin career, whereby in this country I'm more associated with the Blockheads. In America, it's for more the club things. I had another song that I wrote with Ian called "Number One," which is in a movie called Mike's Murder, which is a lot of people know me from that. But then also I was doing film scores. I did a K2, the film score, although it's only on the director's cut these days. Hans Zimmer got replaced my music on another version of the film. But in a way, I've always loved making music, and with a movie, the dialogue is what is the equivalent of a lyric to a song. So if you see what I mean, the dialogue then becomes your focal point in a movie. So you have to paint the appropriate music.
Nice.
And that's what you're doing with a lyric. With Ian, he didn't know what a genre, he never used the word genre. He said, so whatever he presented to me, I would try and paint the appropriate color. And as time went, paint the right music, the right environment for it. As time went on, with Ian, I would then say, as he trusted me more, I'd say, hey, how about this? And I'd present music to him. And then he would write a lyric to that. And that was the way, such was the trust that we had between us. And so it could go either way.
Would you put your solo stuff into a genre?
Ooh.
Could you?
Well, the new album that I'm going to put out, called Flow. I would say it's very soulful based. It's very. If I had to say, what it's pretty funky. It's pretty soulful. there's a lot of music I'm writing at the moment. I'm actually writing with a duduk player, and you ask, what is a duduk? Well, it's a Middle Eastern kind of clarinet kind of instrument. Okay. So I just love making music that moves me, but I'm not including that on that kind of stuff on Flow, the album. Right. Flow, I would say, is a collection of songs written over the last couple of years. Although one goes back as early as 2012, way back then, but most of it was written the last couple of years. And to be honest, it's the single "Bodies Without a Soul."
Yeah. Out on the 5th of May, guys. Just so you know, there'll be a link to the description. I'll put a link to your website. I presume everything will be on your website about.
Yeah.
You can download and stream it. It'll be in the description of this podcast for everybody listening to.
Yeah, it was only when I recorded that song that I suddenly thought that was the last song I wrote. I thought, you know what, I could perform this stuff live. Nice. Because I did do a gig back in 2012. One gig I did to do my own music at the Jazz Cafe in Camden Town in London, and I had a 14-piece band. I did so much rehearsal that I got a frozen shoulder. Carrying gear backwards and forwards to keyboards, guitars, mic stands, you name it. And one arm was longer than the other at the end of it. Very quite painful, really. Yeah. And I lost about 1,700 quid on the gig. Oh, right. It was, but it was like hallelujah. I'd done it. I'd gone out, and I remember I had a lot of fun. I'd even did Reasons to Be Cheerful, and I'd arranged Johnny's guitar solo for horns because I had a 3-piece horn section, and that stuff like that was really a lot of fun. Derek got up and sang a couple of songs. If I went out again doing my thing, I'd have to really cut it down. I don't think I could do it with less than 5 musicians and singers. It's just not economic.
Sure. Well, do you look forward to a new record release as if it was the first one again? So you've got the album Flow coming out. Remind us of the date that Flow comes out, mate.
19th of May.
19th of May. And it'll be on chazjankel.com as well. We'll put the link in the description again for you. Are you still excited about the new album coming out as you were 40 years ago? How's it still feel throughout all these years to still be doing it?
Well, it feels fantastic, Carl. Yeah. I mean, honestly, if you do something you love, it's not hard work, is it? Yeah. And I tell you what, really, honestly, I've been putting up odd pieces of music as singles over the years online. Just odd pieces of music. And then one day I just suddenly thought to myself, what did we used to do in the old days? Oh yeah, we made albums. Yeah. And it's a fantastic feeling to, I'm thinking, yeah, that's what I used to do when I was a youth. I used to sit and look at, Axis Boulder's Love or whatever, and pore over the graphics and read about, look at little details and photographs. And it was quite a visceral experience. So I thought, I'm going to put an album together. And to be honest, I don't think I'd be talking to you now if I didn't have an album. Yeah. I think people are somehow much more intrigued. It's like going to see an artist's work. Usually they'll have an exhibition or a collection of work. You don't generally go and see an exhibition of one painting, do you? I mean, that painting would just be one of hundreds sitting on the wall. But when you have an album or a collection, it has a bit more of a kind of bit more weight, I think. I feel good about it. I just know I feel it was the right thing to do, Carl, to bring this out, to put this album out.
Well, I can't wait for the album, mate. I've really enjoyed getting to know you and having a chat today. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the people that are thinking about, pre-ordering your album or clicking on your website? Is there anything you want to say to Chaz fans just before they do it? Chaz fans?
Chaz fans, I like that. Not really. I mean, have a lovely day, really. In as much as, make the most of it. I mean, one thing I've discovered as I get older, 71 now, and probably most of your listeners or viewers are younger. There might be the odd one,
We're all mainly in his 40s. There's a few young'uns in there as well.
Yeah. Is just make the most of the day. If I have anything to say, is like, don't squander the light. is my latest, little quote. Well, no, not quote. It's just a thought I have. You know, the light is so incredible. I mean, the opportunity to be creative is a fantastic gift. And I mean, I think what I'm doing now as I get older, I'm kind of consolidating. Tidying the papers, straightening things up. Yeah. But the truth of the matter is, you don't change. The body might get older, but that spirit, it never. The feeling you had when you're a teenager, that excitement, never changes. As the creative spirit is always there. It's just whether you want to listen to it. It's always there. And just in conclusion, I'd say that was is what I'm trying to say in Bodies Without a Soul. Yeah. Is that however crazy and nutty this world is, and we know it is, we haven't even talked about that, but there's a lot of, you know what I mean? There's a lot of negative forces. Yeah. And you sometimes think, how the hell are we going to shift that? There's nothing in the way of these people. There's no what's the word I'm looking for? Control. There's nothing controlling the people who've got so much money, and they forge ahead. Yeah. But in spite of all of that, there's a place within you which is always calm, always peaceful, and it's always there. It's beneath all of that. And I think just remembering that is the most wonderful feeling. That that joy that's always there. It's always there.
Chaz Jankel, thanks for your time, mate. Really enjoyed it. Really appreciate it. Cheers, pal.
Thanks, Carl.